$450 million.
A massive number.
It is. And just so we're all on the same page, we are not talking about, a celebrity's net worth or the budget for a summer blockbuster.
No.
This $450 million is the estimated annual benefit that the state of Alabama allegedly gets from what our sources are calling a forced labor scheme.
And that figure is really the anchor for everything we're going to get into today. We're looking at a huge class action lawsuit. It's called Council v. Ivey.
Kay Ivey, that's the governor of Alabama.
The governor, yes.
Yeah.
But the lawsuit, it's really targeting the entire apparatus. You're talking the Department of Corrections, local sheriffs, even private corporations.
And the main allegation is that the prison system in Alabama isn't really about public safety anymore, but it's been turned into a business.
A business designed to extract labor. That's the claim. And not just cheap labor, coerced labor.
I want to pause on that for a second, because the sources, they immediately use the phrase modern-day slavery. And that's a very heavy, very charged term. Usually you hear that, and it feels like a metaphor or maybe some kind of political rhetoric. But this lawsuit seems to be using it, well, literally. Is that just legal hyperbole?
That's the crucial question, isn't it? And to understand why they use that word, we have to look at the legal definition of an employee. The plaintiffs here, the incarcerated people, they're arguing that under federal law, they meet every single criteria. They're hired, they're supervised, and their work directly benefits an employer.
But the state's position is, no, you're not employees, you're prisoners.
The state relies on the 13th Amendment. And most people, they know it abolished slavery, but they forget the second half of the sentence.
The fine print.
The fine print, except as a punishment for crime. That exception is the whole mechanism. The lawsuit argues that Alabama is exploiting that loophole to kind of recreate a system of chattel slavery. They're saying it's not about rehabilitation, it's about a captive workforce that cannot say no.
Let's get into the mechanics of that, because cannot say no implies force. I mean, if you're in prison, you expect to have to follow rules, right? Keep your cell clean.
Yeah.
But this is something else entirely.
Oh, very different. The lawsuit details a system they call work or violence. It alleges that the Alabama Department of Corrections, the ADOC, uses the threat of brutal physical harm to make sure production quotas are met.
Okay, so give me an example. If I refuse to go work on a road crew one day because I'm sick, or maybe I just don't want to, what happens?
It's not just about losing privileges. The sources describe something much darker. If you refuse to work, you're often put in isolation. Or you're moved to dorms that are known to be incredibly dangerous.
What does that mean?
The allegation is that the prison administration essentially deputizes other, more violent prisoners to enforce the rules.
So like hit squads.
The sources describe them pretty much that way. You're thrown into an environment where the homicide rate is 10 times higher than the state average. So the choice isn't work or lose TV. It's work or risk being beaten, sexually assaulted, or even killed.
That puts the forced in forced labor.
It creates a fully coerced workforce. And this is where that huge financial incentive kicks in. If you have a workforce that can't strike, can't unionize, and can't refuse dangerous conditions, you have a massive economic advantage.
Okay, let's talk about the money. We mentioned that $450 million benefit to the state. How does that actually break down? Are these people getting paid anything at all?
Well, it depends on who they're working for. There are sort of two main buckets. First, you have the work that's done for the state itself.
Yeah.
Maintenance, cooking, cleaning, maybe working for the Department of Transportation.
Filling potholes, that kind of...
Exactly. For those jobs, the pay is often zero.
Nothing.
Nothing. If they're lucky, they might make up to 25 cents an hour.
Quarter an hour?
Capped at $2 a day. But that's the simple part of the scheme, really. The more complex part is the work release programs, where the ADOC leases out labor to private companies.
This is what really caught my eye in the reading. We're not just talking about the state anymore. We're talking about huge private brands, fast food chains, car parts manufacturers.
Burger King, McDonald's, Wendy's, Bama Budweiser. The lawsuit lists over 575 private corporations.
But wait a minute. If I'm McDonald's, I have to follow federal labor laws. I have to pay a minimum wage. I can't just pay a guy a quarter to flip burgers, can I?
Technically, the companies often do pay a wage that looks, closer to the real rate on paper, but the worker never sees that money.
Where does it go?
The ADOC intercepts it. The state takes a 40% cut of the gross wages right off the top.
40%. That sounds like a massive tax.
Yeah.
How do they even justify taking almost half of someone's paycheck?
They call it a fee. to cover the cost of incarceration, but the lawsuit, it calls it a human trafficking fee.
Wow. That is incredibly specific language.
And it's framed that way because the ADOC is basically acting as a staffing agency that just keeps the commission. I mean, in fiscal year 2024, the ADOC reported a $12.2 million profit just from these programs.
So the prison system is a profit center. It's not just a cost for taxpayers. It's actually generating revenue for the state.
And that profit creates a really perverse incentive. If your prison system makes money based on how many people you have leased out to Burger King or working in poultry plants, do you want fewer prisoners?
Yeah, you want more. Or at the very least, you want to keep the ones you have.
And you specifically want to keep the productive ones. Which brings us to what the lawsuit calls the parole trap. And I think this is one of the most damning parts of the sources.
This part just flipped my entire understanding of good behavior on its head. The conventional wisdom is you go to prison, you learn a trade, you keep your nose clean, you get parole. But the data here suggests the opposite is happening.
The data is staggering. Up until around 2018, parole grants in Alabama were actually rising. They hit about 53%. Then Governor Kay Ivey appointed a new chair to the parole board and, well, everything changed.
The numbers crash.
They plummeted. By 2022, the grant rate for Black applicants dropped to 6%.
6%. That's statistically almost zero.
Right. And white applicants were more than twice as likely to get parole, but even their numbers fell off a cliff. The lawsuit argues this isn't just about being tough on crime. It says the parole board is systematically denying release to the people who are most valuable to the labor operation.
So if you're the guy who knows how to fix the HVAC or you're the best cook in the kitchen, you're actually less likely to get out because they can't replace you.
That is the allegation, exactly. The complaint states they target people with the best training, work, and disciplinary records for denial.
And we have a specific example of this, the story of Alamirio English. I found this part of the source material it's difficult to read because of the injustice.
Alamirio English is a plaintiff in the case, and his story illustrates this trap perfectly. He had his parole revoked because of some new charges. But here's a kicker. He was acquitted of those charges.
A jury found him not guilty. So, logically, he should have been released immediately?
You would think so, but he was kept in prison for 2 more years.
Why?
Because he was a custodial supervisor. He was in charge of a dorm of 190 men. He was on call 24/7, effectively doing the job of a paid correctional officer.
Free.
Unpaid. The source material quotes him saying he was paid in peanut butter jelly sandwiches and leftovers from the kitchen.
That detail about the sandwiches, it's not just the money, it's the dignity. You have a grown man managing 190 people, keeping the peace in a dangerous place, and you're paying him in scraps.
And when he asked why he wasn't being released, the response was basically that he was too useful. He's quoted as saying, if they can't replace you, they don't let you go.
It turns the whole concept of rehabilitation into a liability. If you get too good, you become a permanent asset of the state.
It essentially freezes time for these people, and this all connects back to what we touched on earlier with the 13th Amendment. The lawsuit argues this isn't some accidental glitch in the system. It's the system functioning exactly as it was designed to post-1865.
We talked about the loophole, slavery is abolished except for a crime.
Right. When the Civil War ended, Alabama's economy was in ruins. They had relied entirely on enslaved labor. So almost immediately, you saw the rise of the convict lease system. They would arrest formerly enslaved people for things like vagrancy or loitering.
Basically for existing while black.
Exactly. And then they would lease them back to the plantations and the mines.
So the argument in Counsel v. Ivey is that this modern work release program is just convict leasing 2.0.
That's precisely the argument. The formal convict lease system ended in 1928, but the plaintiffs argue the mechanism never actually went away. It just changed its branding. The economic engine, which is extracting profit from incarcerated bodies, remained.
And speaking of resisting that engine, we have to talk about Robert Earl Counsel, also known as Kinetic Justice. He's the lead plaintiff.
He's a founder of the Free Alabama movement. He recognized that the only leverage these prisoners had was their labor. So he started organizing strikes.
Which, inside a prison, has to be incredibly dangerous.
He paid a horrific price. The sources detail that he spent 5 years in solitary confinement. He endured beatings so severe they resulted in permanent brain injury and blindness.
Blindness.
Yes. And yet he continues to organize. His whole perspective is that as long as the state is profiting, the system will never change. He calls it involuntary servitude, plain and simple.
Now, here's a part of the story that I really didn't expect. Usually you think of prison reform as a social justice issue. But in this lawsuit, you have major labor unions signing on as plaintiffs, the RWDSU and the USSW.
This is a critical development. You have to ask, why would a union that represents, say, poultry workers care so much about prison labor?
Well, my cynical side says, cheap burgers. If McDonald's gets cheap labor, doesn't that keep prices down? Why would the unions want to stop that?
Because of the race to the bottom. Imagine you're working at a poultry plant in Alabama. You want to negotiate for a raise, or maybe just better safety gloves. The company can turn around and say, why should we pay you $15 an hour when we can lease a prisoner from the ADAC for a fraction of that?
So the prison labor acts like an anchor on everyone else's wages.
It destroys their bargaining power. You can't compete with a worker who is legally prohibited from saying no and costs pennies on the dollar. Stuart Applebaum, the president of the RWDSU, he argues that this suppresses wages for the entire working class of Alabama, not just the incarcerated population.
It pits the free worker against the coerced worker.
And it distorts the free market. If you believe in fair competition, this system is fundamentally anti-competitive. The companies using prison labor have an unfair advantage over companies that hire free citizens and pay them a fair wage.
Which makes this an economic issue for every single resident of the state, whether they care about prison conditions or not.
That's the strategy. By framing this as an economic injury to free workers, they broaden the coalition in a really significant way.
We've talked about the violence used to force work, but we should probably paint a clearer picture of the environment inside these places. The sources call Alabama's system the deadliest in the nation.
Yeah, the Department of Justice has actually sued Alabama over this separately. The overcrowding is severe. Some facilities are at nearly double their capacity. But the real issue is understaffing.
Which seems so ironic given how many people are locked up there.
The prisons are critically short on correctional officers. So what does the ADOC do? It uses prisoners to fill the gaps. The sources mention prisoners performing dorm supervision and administrative tasks.
This goes right back to Alamirio English running his own dorm.
It creates this chaotic, lawless environment. Violence, extortion, sexual assault, they become tools of control. If the guards aren't there, the enforcers are. And if you want to stay safe, maybe you agree to work that extra shift at the factory. The violence is the stick that makes the carrot of work release look like the only option for survival.
So where does this lawsuit stand right now? It was filed in late 2023. These things can drag on for years.
It's still in the early litigation phase, and the state is, you can imagine, fighting it hard. However, it seems like the external pressure is starting to work. It's cracking the foundation a little bit.
The sources mentioned a change at the parole board.
Leigh Wathney, the chair who oversaw that massive drop in parole grants we talked about, was not renewed for her position in 2025. She's out.
And what happened to the numbers after she left?
They shot back up almost immediately. As of August 2025, parole grant rates have risen to nearly 67%.
That is a wild swing, from 6% to 67%. It almost proves the point that the low numbers were a policy choice, not a reflection of the prisoner's behavior.
It certainly suggests that when you shine a light into these dark corners, the system has to react. And the media attention, there's an HBO documentary called The Alabama Solution that came out in 2025, plus a lot of coverage from the New York Times. It's just made it harder for the state to operate this scheme in the shadows.
It's amazing what happens when people actually start watching.
Transparency is the enemy of this kind of exploitation.
Before we wrap up, I want to go back to a question that was posed by Alamirio English. It was in the source material, and I think it just perfectly sums up the entire perverse incentive structure we've been talking about.
I know the quote you mean. He asked, "Why would the slave master, by his own free will, release men on parole who aid and assist them at making their paid jobs easier and carefree?"
It's a rhetorical question, but it's just devastating. If the state is addicted to the labor, why on earth would they ever let the labor go?
It forces us to ask what the purpose of our justice system really is. Is it justice? Or is it an economic engine? Because at the end of the day, you can't have both. You can't have a system designed to correct behavior that is also financially dependent on that behavior never being corrected.
And that is the conflict right at the heart of Counsel v. Ivey.
It is. And it's a conflict that involves 21,000 human beings currently inside that system.
We'll keep tracking this case as it moves through the courts. I'm sure there's a lot more to unpack as the legal arguments get refined.
Absolutely. The legal definition of employee is going to be a battleground for the next decade, I think.
Thanks for diving in with us.
Always a pleasure.